The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Hello everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. Today is Monday, December 12th, 2022, day 15 after the start of the Maunaloa eruption. And Dane, this eruptive phase, this we'll call it the first eruptive phase. It might be the only eruptive phase of this eruption. We'll have to wait and see that part of it. But this eruptive phase of Mauna Loa's eruption seems to be over.
Yeah, it seems to be it. That's the main flow down the slope and all that. The channel's been compromised and no more lava visible except the little incandescent glowing occasionally in spots, huh?
Yeah, I think I saw a little spot of glow on a camera like at 5:41 this morning, but you can have glow in the pit. The lava can be underground and not actually coming to the surface, or it could be just still hot like a kiln, like a red hot oven, glowing from the remnant heat as well. So it's hard to tell. A lot of weather going through the area, so you can't tell for sure if it's if there's any variation in any actual glow itself, or if it's just weather blowing in a way. So we have to wait and see. But regardless, lava's not coming out of the ground and it's not going down the hill. That's the bottom line right now. So that's the story on Maunaloa. We'll review the imagery for you guys. Kilauea also entering a pause officially yesterday. There had been it's been coming for a while. We saw that decrease in lava at the surface and the hardening of the lava lake, but it was still kind of trickling and oozing a little bit until yesterday, day before that. So now it's fully entered a pause, no lava on the surface on either volcano for once here. So
yeah, interesting. Erupting together, then pausing together.
quite the swing. Yeah, I mean, we go from there's way too much going on to suddenly nothing's happening in either place, at least on the surface. Well, we have the USGS HVO monitoring instruments, so we'll check into those and look at that and figure out what the clues might be telling us of what's coming next. Of course, we'll take questions on the way. They're going to be leading the Q&A and a chat and collecting questions as we go, and monitoring our video and audio. If you have any issues, let them know. So that's the menu today, Dane. Anything else you wanna lead in with?
Oh, I think you just covered it. I was going to just mention the questions in the chat, drop them, and we'll try and get them answered in the Q&A segment. Otherwise, I think we can just get into it, huh?
Yeah, sounds good. So I'll show you guys. This is the image that was taken this morning of Fissure 3 event there, and this is that long fissure. The fissure was oriented kind of in this direction like this, so that's what shot out and made this long hill, this long horseshoe cone. It's really elongated here, and we saw the lava was shooting out from more so on this front end, the eastern end, when it was really shooting high. And as the eruption came to an end, it seemed to retreat back towards that west end, back over here in the back of the image. And that's the area where we're seeing that last bit of glow. And USGS reported to hearing explosions from the hole and seeing some spatter getting shot out. So that's why they are saying the eruptive phase, the eruption may be over. But of course, if you get a little bit of spatter coming out there, they can verify then technically it's still actually erupting there. But for the sake of everyone's clarity here, we're just going to call it this eruptive phase being over, just because that seems to be the simplest way to put it to people, rather than mincing our words and hedging our bets here. So that's the image from this morning. Let's go through some of the updates. Since we have been off this weekend, we'll catch up a little bit. Let me get this a little better on the screen here. There's that. So going back to Saturday morning, there is actually some issue with the updates. There's an update released at 9:12, and then another one coming in at 9:32, and another one coming in at 9:36. So something happened there, and I did get some messages from people with some confusion on what was going on. But ultimately, we'll move past all that. The Saturday morning update noted that as of 7 a.m., December 10th, Saturday, a lava pond replaced the fountains at the Fissure 3 vent. The pond fed short flows extended only 1.6 miles from the vent, but were already stagnating. The channels below all drained. That main flow front by Daniel K. Inouye Highway, Saddle Road, remained stalled about 1.7 miles and was still settling and still glowing a little bit. An active main flow front still glows at night and may inch northward very slowly as it settles. On Saturday, they reported the SO2 for the previous Thursday, the 8th. So down to 30,000 tons per day on Thursday, on the 8th. And actually, we'll see further reports say that it'll drop to 20,000 on the 9th, and then down to 2,000 on the 10th, which is the most recent measurement. So back to Saturday, the output of gas had dropped dramatically down to 2,000 tons per day. That's still fairly robust for like something like Kilauea. It could put out that much in this long-term effusive phase. So that's by itself, that's not telling you that's too little to put out lava. But it's a lot lower than the initial 250,000. That was that first report. So SO2 dropping as well. They say here, starting on Saturday, tremor continues its slow and steady decline. This indicates magma supply to the vent is decreasing. And then they go on to say the significance, so we'll skip past that for now because we'll come to it again. They then, Saturday afternoon, I should say, put out a volcanic activity notice and reduced the volcano alert level from warning to watch. So that's the highest level to the next highest, right? So watch is going to correspond to orange more or less if they were to be paired. And warning would be like highest, like the red. So we actually went down aviation to orange first, and now we're going to ground alert level down to watch as well. And that's because of the reduced threat to any infrastructure. So this is somewhat of a standalone report, so it repeats a lot of the information that we've been summarizing for you guys. They do note high eruption rates will not resume based on past eruptive behavior, and current behavior suggests that the eruption may end soon. However, an inflationary trend of Maunaloa summit is accompanying the decreased activity, and there's a small possibility that the eruption could continue at very low eruptive rates. So we'll look into this a little bit, this whole possibility of a continuing low eruptive rate phase. But in any case, for those reasons, HVO reduced the alert level from warning to watch. Deviation code remaining in orange, and continuing to monitor there. So that was Saturday. Well, I should also note here, I can keep going down. There's actually more, some information about the hazards, but they also note here from Saturday, HVO continued to issue a morning daily update on the status of activity. However, no longer issue afternoon status reports. Additional notices will be issued as activity warrants. So we're down to now one daily update again to go along with this drop from warning to watch. So then we just have one update for Sunday. The Sunday update says that the eruption of Maunaloa may still be active. Incandescence is restricted to the cone that formed around a Fissure 3 vent, with no observable activity anywhere else in the rest of the flow field overnight. So everything else is fairly similar. There's a 20,000 tons SO2 for December 9th. And at that point, yesterday morning, tremor is no longer detectable. Summit and Northeast Rift zone inflation started December 7th and is continuing. So that was yesterday, and then to bring it current to today from this morning, they note a Northeast Rift zone eruption of Manolo may still be active. So see they're using that more broad terminology there. Maybe it may still be active at Fissure 3 vent, but all 2022 lava flows appear to be inactive. As of 7 a.m. today, December 12th, HVO overflight found only residual incandescence and no lava movement in the F3 vent. As they were leaving, the field crew heard small explosions accompanied by sprays of spatter from the west end of the Fissure 3 vent. Channels below the vent appear drained of lava and no longer feed the main flow. So that's the key update from today. SO2 rate still reduced on December 10th. It was approximately 2,000 tons per day. So there it is right there. Tremor no longer detectable. And once again, and I'll read it this time, the significance of the continuing inflation while the flow field is inactive is not yet clear. It is common for eruptions to wax and wane or pause completely. But none of the 8 recorded eruptions from Mauna Loa's northeast rift zone returned to high eruption rates after those rates decreased significantly. Nevertheless, HVO continues to closely monitor the current activity. So that is the USGS summary there. We have a most recent map. It's not showing any different extent of the flow fields. You can zoom it in. Everything is shown to be inactive at the front, all the way down a flow field inactive. Fissure 3 is marked on here, but really there is no growth in flow field coverage. And we do have some statistics here. Oh, excuse me. So total area covered, 16.5 square miles. So I want to say, let's see if I can get the number up here. 16.5 square miles is 43 square kilometers, or about 10,560 acres. If you're curious. So we don't have a volume yet. In the past, we've had once the mapping is fully complete by the USGS, they'll be able to give us a volume of that to go along with this area, and we'll have some idea of the average thickness of the flows in places and how it compares to other eruptions as well. What I can tell you is that the coverage of ground is about 90% of what we saw in 1984, so a little bit less, 10% less than 1984 covered as far as its area, in case you're wondering. So just based on that, if you assume that they end up being more or less the same thickness on average, this eruption appears to be slightly smaller than that one at this point in time. We'll have to wait and see how it all adds up. All right, so that's the map, and there's not much more to say on that. So we'll move on to the interesting signals, and let's start with earthquakes. Here's earthquakes for the last day. So on Mauna Loa, nothing at the summit or the northeast rift. You have one on the flank over here. 2.2 on that moving flank, and really most of the action is around Kilauea summit. So Kilauea does seem to have magma coming into it. We've been saying at depth for a while, but it seems to be coming to the shallower regions of the volcano already. So it seems likely that Kilauea is going to resume its song and dance before too long here. And you see the earthquakes expressing that magma adjustment underground still. It didn't shut off because it relieved its magma supply. It got shut off because of adjustments to Maunaloa, it seems like. So, and thus it's going to likely come back. So that's the earthquake map there. Let's go to some of the signals. So on Mauna Loa, the most interesting thing here is a tilt. So here's a 1 week tilt and 1 month tilt. And I know some of these can be hard to see on the screen, so if I can zoom in a little bit more. We're looking at the blue line really is really the one that's showing us what we want to see. So we were in mid-eruption here. We had that little earthquake near the summit, a little adjustment. And then we saw a turnaround at the tilt that had been deflating. This is essentially the ground sagging down. And when the line points back upwards, it's reinflating, reswelling. So presumably magma is gathering underground to pressurize the ground to actually cause it to bulge a little bit. Right, these are super sensitive instruments. They're measuring in microradians. That's radians and degrees. That's a really, really small fraction of angle there. But what you can see is that since that later in the 7th, it's been coming up. And you can see that down here, we're at around -5 microradians, more or less. And we come all the way to this end, we're going to end up at +5 microradians. So we've really come up about 10 microradians of tilt in the last less than a week. And for a tilt meter that before this whole eruption never showed any signal for years and years and years and years, unless the magma was really shallow, this is telling us that magma is filling back inside the volcano at really shallow levels once again. So that's the pattern there, and a little bit hard to tell, but it looks to me like the rate might have been coming up at a decent rate here. But since it seems like in the last day and a half, I would say more or less, it seems to me like it might be flattening out a little bit right there. Still rising, but maybe at a slightly lower rate, and it's hard to tell there. If I come out to this 1 month plot, you can see that whole initial phase of the eruption here. That's the ground jerking and swelling really massively as magma was about to break through the surface. It breaks through, it releases the pressure, so then it drops back down. And essentially it's relieving that pressure on and on until this point here, and then it comes back upwards. So that's where you see that inflationary signal, and you can see why the USGS mentions this as a concern that the volcano may do something further, another phase perhaps. So let me zoom into this bit of the plot. Since it's a little bit more compressed, it might be a little bit easier to see this feature I'm talking about, it being a little bit flatter. It's almost parallel to that hash mark there, like flat that long, and then it comes down a little bit, and then a little faster. So maybe it's starting to turn over. It's hard to tell. We'll have to wait and see what that actually does in the next few days here. However, well, before I do my however, let me show you the GPS. There's the 1 year north to south across the summit, and so the scale here is in 5 centimeters per grid line, and there is that buildup all the way up to the eruption when it actually jumps up all the way to here. What we care about is the features after that, right? So it jumps up here, and then essentially it's sagging, same thing in that same deflationary signal. But here you can see for the last few days, it does appear to have turned around, and now those sides are actually going back further apart. So we're seeing the signals on the GPS as well as the tilt consistently there, that the magma is refilling the volcano throughout, right? The GPS picks up the shallow and deep signals, so it's getting all of it. And the tilt is more so the shallow, so it seems like it's all the parts of the volcano. And I'm just going to scroll down here. This is the up and down signal at just one of those stations. And see, it went up quickly. This eruption was about to begin, and it went down a whole bunch. And here at the very end, you can see it's actually starting to come back up a little bit too. And so this is what we're looking at a while ago to get a clue as to whether magma is coming in. And so here we're seeing consistent. The ground is moving up, it's spreading apart, and it's tilting outwards as magma is refilling the volcano. So that's what we see. And even as magma has stopped coming out of the ground, as a tremor stopped and all of that. Okay, now my however. If we go to this paper, which is Professional Paper 1350, Chapter 19, this is Jack Lockwood et al. Summarizing the 75 and 84 periods of activity, including what follows. Right, and so the abstracts of these are summarizing the most important points. I'm not going to read obviously the whole thing here, But I'm going to highlight a couple of things here that they thought important enough to put in a summary for this entire paper. So here we go. The Maunaloa summit inflated rapidly during the first 2 years after the 75 eruption, but at lesser rates after 1977. Modeling of the data showed this inflation was caused by magma accumulation in the shallow storage reservoir beneath the southern edge of the summit caldera. Seismic activity was steady, although rates of intermediate depth earthquakes began to increase in 1980, as did rates of deformation, resulting in a renewed forecast in 1983 for an eruption within the next 2 years, right? So they saw inflation, to summarize, from 75 through 77 at rapid rates. And afterwards, it was still inflating, but a little bit slower. Then 84 eruption actually happens, and I'm going to skip here to the end. And after the eruption of 84, here we go. The summit area of Maunaloa began to reinflate immediately after the 1984 eruption, indicating that the recharge processes for the volcano's next eruption may have already begun. They said this back in 1985, that the volcano had begun to recharge for its next eruption. Now, so that was true in 84, and it took it 38 years until today to actually erupt. Right? So just because we're seeing the inflation does not necessarily mean that it's going to do another phase and more lava is going to come out, because as you can see, 75 and 84 both times inflated rapidly immediately after that happened. So here is a plot, because it's easier to look at the images. So it's hard to tell exactly, and these are different numbers. But here's a little bit of the map. HVO 93 is the MOK station. That's the one we're currently using still as our tilt meter. And the wild station over here, that's the HVO 92. So the reason we have them both is because the HVO 93 that we use now doesn't go all the way back. There's a little bit of a gap right here. And so what you're looking at here is, we normally have the blue line and the green line. Imagine this is the blue line and this is the green line, and similar, this is a blue line and this is a green line for each of these stations. So this is the one on the north side, and this is the one on the south side. So this is the one we're going to compare to as this one up here. But we'll use this one below to fill in this gap here below, following a 75 eruption too. So there is a tilt in microradians once again. So if you'll note, from 75 to about a year later in 76, it looks like this volcano inflated somewhere in the order of, well, I'd give it like 50 or 60 microradians just in that first year, right, on that side. So, even though it's shocking to us to see that amount of deformation at the summit, and it seems like it's something that could be eruptive, the volcano is used to moving massively as it recovers from these eruptions. So that was the case in following 75 to 77 here. And moving through, there is the 84 eruption, similar pattern. It kind of drops down. Let's go up to here. It drops down. And then immediately afterwards starts reinflating too. So in this case, it looks like it reinflated on the order of maybe 40 microradians, something like that. But also immediately afterwards there. And so just going to show the two eruptions that we have tilt data for are these ones. We don't have things going back before that. Previous 75 was 1950. They both show the same pattern, and they both did not have that secondary phase. However, geologically, you can see other flows on a flow field that did have multiple phases, and that's where that caveat comes from. Because even if we didn't have the instruments in place to see that, it could have happened before. And so we're looking at geology to give us that extra dimension there of what else is possible to happen. So we see that it's possible that it can happen, but we're not seeing signals necessarily that are any different at this point in time. And so if I can just bring up one paragraph of that conclusions of this paper, right? They say, the 75-84 Maunaloa eruptive sequence was a first for which extensive observations of geodetic, geoelectrical, geochemical, gravity, and temperature phenomena were possible. More has been learned about Maunaloa inflation and eruption processes during this period than in all earlier historical eruptions. That's what I just was trying to share, similar. This was Maunaloa's first eruptive sequence since 1950, and involved the first flank eruption in Northeast Rift since 1942. Intervals between Northeast Rift's flank eruptions have, however, been as short as 41 months. That was from 1852 to 55. And post-eruption geodetic measurements suggest inflation of Mauna Loa for her next eruption has already begun. And once again, this was what they were stating following 84 and 85, wondering what that volcano could do next, why she was inflating already again, and how soon would the next eruption be. And in that case, it took until 2022. So obviously, very, very little data points. It's hard to make any kind of correlation and pattern from that, but that is what we know from the last two that we have. So there is that plot that we've seen before from the USGS talks. And just to see it similarly, there is a 75 eruption right there. So this phase right here where it's rising, that's the distance, and more akin to the GPS measurement rather than tilt, but still you can see it's extending, right, for very quickly. In fact, you can see it looks like 20 centimeters in those next couple of years. And similarly, after 84, this is an 84 eruption right here. Also afterwards, similarly rising really quickly, then slowing down and coming up, and then eventually starts doing some wiggles over here. So there's what it actually looks like in the plot that we've seen if you've been following us since before this eruption actually began, and we've been showing these plots as well. So I'm trying to tie it all together here. So that is the deformation story there on Maunaloa. And so coming back to the earthquakes here, there's a last week of earthquakes that we're seeing. And they are under this region, directly underneath the summit and southwest summit area as well, that eventually connects to the upper southwest rift here. So these are all the same areas and regions we've had earthquakes recently. And when it seemed like it might have been from the sagging last week, now it could be due to the actual refilling. But what you might see is that compared to the map that we just saw, earthquakes in the last day are essentially none. And if we look back to the whole last week, then we start catching maybe some of those ones a week ago that were more of that settling phenomena. So let's wait a little longer and see what actually emerges in the pattern here. And what we can look at as far as rates, here we are, the rates are almost zero. There was that eruptive day and following eruption there. And so in the grand scheme of things, there's a whole last year with earthquakes per week here, and so we're crashing down on those as well after that kind of build-up phase in late September and then eruptive phase in late November to December. And for the last 5 years, earthquakes per month. There you get that September, November, December, 3 peaks in a row there, and then now we'll have a small one coming back. So that's the grand big picture of earthquakes here. So that's the underground signals, really. We can look at VOG. VOG is produced by the amount of gas coming out. There's a lot less gas coming out. The inputs into this model, 1,900 tons per day from Maunaloa, 670 from Kilauea. So relatively little, right? Because the volcano has put out a lot more over time. But if you compare this to any industrial activity, it's still a lot. So, but it helps that the volume coming out is down, and there is that VMAP forecast showing where the VOG may impact ground level. So you see a lot of it's an upslope around Maunaloa, so not a whole impact there, and you get a little bit down here in the Pahala region where it seems like cloud seems to want to sit right in there. So that is the zone where Kilauea's VOG often goes, so that's unfortunately normal for that area, but that is still ongoing. Let's just check in with the purple air. Look at purple air, we can see that that impact that we're looking at on the Kona side the last few days appears to have cleared, at least recently. So that's good to see. Not to say that there aren't impacts anywhere. Once again, we're just trying to get a snapshot of the overall big picture here. So similar to park, everything's in the green. I won't show the park there, but we'll turn now to some of the visuals. So looking in at the UH 2.2 meter live stream from Mauna Kea, looking at Maunaloa. No more gas cloud, plume cloud coming from here, and we'll see this come dark, and we might see some spots of glow still from the channel, the upper channel especially. That lower flow front, where there's a big stack of lava still cooling and hot, but not as much from the vent itself. So let's show you a few of the images first, and then we'll bring up some of the time lapses. We have a little add-on to the December 9th set that was released. So we talked about how the flows were stagnated up by the channel. And here is some more images of that flow drained within the channel. So this gives you some idea of how deep those channels actually are. And Dr. Han mentioned this, that they estimated that the depth of the channel is at about 4 meters, right? You're talking about like, what's that, like close to 15 feet or so. And they did that from looking at standing wave trains, like where the lava is moving through the channel and it's creating those standing waves, and they can actually measure the spacing and the height and all that and figure out the depth, and they came up with about 4 meters, which, by the way, is the same number that was ultimately decided for 84, was that same 4 meters. So that's up at the top where the lava is shooting out through a single channel and before it spreads out everywhere. Right? So there it is in that canyon. And there is the Fissure 3 vent when the fountains were ending and it was switching to having a pond of lava that was filling this western area up here. And it seems like there's an overflow spot and it drains out that way there. So there's a few images of this. There is that higher pond and a drainage spot coming out right there. And that is that December 9th set. So moving ahead in time, the set released on Saturday, December 10th, showing, you can see, like there's some interesting light catching here. I presume that's what this actually is, rather than any kind of it looks yellow like it could be sulfur, but it looks like it's just actually the very, very low angle of light at sunrise when these guys fly out first thing. But you see the red there in the channel just behind, and it's only exposed here and a little bit more if you look further down, but you see largely crusted over in many places and just oozing out as it's draining out of the channels there. At the vent that next day, that pond is still active, but it looks like it's crusting over more. You still see a little bit of that drain out spot and lava flows down further. More gas coming out the back. We get a map. We get a view where we can actually see in the shadow. It's really, really interesting. I like this one because it really clearly shows the difference of looking at the lava in the daytime and the nighttime, right? So here in the shadow of this, the sun hasn't yet risen in this little sliver of the crater, but here it has. So you see the lava in the daytime, it has a silvery appearance in the crust. And you see just a little bit of red on the side, and then there you are, what it looks like in the nighttime. So clearly still coming up there. And look more closely back over here, you also see a little bit of red coming up on that backside too. So this whole area seems to be was still evolving, falling in. Originally that fissure went all the way across and then this cone built over top of it, and then as the center of eruption moved back in this direction, it's readjusting once again. Another view of that, there it is back in there, the size of that larger pond all through here, and that drain out spot there. And from a little further back, there's that last drain out spot, and you don't see any red further out of the cone than that. Down through here, nothing else to see there as far as lava. Another view there. Another view there. Similar to the one we just saw. Drain channels, not even a trickle in the bottom of it anymore, unlike that first image we pulled up today. And then there's an image of Kilauea that reminds us to go and check on her just a couple minutes here. So on the surface looking pretty similar, and the lava lake within the pit a little bit lower. Otherwise, no large visual changes on the surface of Kilauea here. So the last image that we have is a single image released today, and there it is, that view straight into that cone this morning with no red lava visible anywhere on it, and that hole in the back, the puka, where they heard those explosions and a little bit of spatter coming out. So if there's any lava that's down in there and not visible to hardly anyone, unless you happen to be flying by a helicopter right next to the thing. So that is the imagery released by the USGS. We'll turn to the webcams, and let me start here at the top. And view earlier today, there's that M8, and you can see almost almost nothing is blocked off by the gas. You can see everything in here. So there's a little bit of a wisp. You can see a little bit of haze through here. But otherwise, it's amazingly clear, showing how little gas is coming out, and that really might be one of the clearest signs that it's plugged itself up and no longer coming out. Let me give it a reload since it is getting a little later in the day. A little bit different, still pretty cool. And scrolling down, there's an M9. You might see some glow from the flow front a little bit during clear weather. The M5, not seeing much of anything. There's a profile of the cone, but it's all inside of the hole now, so you really don't see much on this camera anymore either. Some of these were actually frozen for a couple of days here, but a lot of them are back showing current times, but there's just nothing to see here anymore. Upper channel, totally dark now, and likewise, nothing else to see elsewhere, so stop it there. Well, we'll show the MK. There's an MK no more fume at the top, and really nothing to see here. You might see some of the glow at the bottom of this flow still, essentially at night. Camera. All right, so I'll show you guys some of the time lapses. There's a summit. Let's start off with that NK camera, and this is the view from the NK camera yesterday and overnight. So there it is overnight, just a little spot of red glowing right up there. You see a little bit of spot of red at the camera, at the flow front down here from the camera too. Probably need to pause it and find the spot where the glow is to show you. Yeah, no, pause it. Go back there. Might be too hard, but there's a little bit right in there. Is that front of the flow? There's another spot right there, popped up, but they're right there. So tiny little bits of glow. This is looking from Mauna Kea, so if you're closer, it might look a lot brighter and still interesting. But from a large distance, you can still see some couple of points of glow here and here last night, from all the way across the saddle there. The other thing that's really interesting to look at, if I put it back to the beginning, is the actual plume coming from the vent itself. Let's see if I can zoom it in any more than that. Let's play this. Still putting out fume, and as the day goes on, it seems to die off almost entirely right there before it even gets dark. There's one spot of glow, and hard to tell because, you know, this is, see, clouds do come in here right overnight, and we do know that that's happening too. So the views are mostly over there from that saddle region, maybe a couple of spots of glow, but that's it. So it shows you guys the actual glow from last night at the top of the broadcast here. I'm going to pull us back to the last few days. So when we had the fountain still bubbling, going to the high fountain phase where it was really building a cone, and then a cone pushing back and slumping back in as it was falling and oozing flows out to the side. There it is, kind of bursting out with that stickier lava, falling back in on itself, and then the fountain's dropping down lower and lower and lower, lower and lower, and there it's just about gone. You see some glow at that first night, and I've left all the blurry images too because even blurry glow shows us there's glow. And here's the day yesterday, and some more glow last night. And oh, I'm sorry, that was the night before last. And here we go, there's last night, a couple flashes of glow, and then some darkness, and a couple more flashes, and then that's it. So we might see some more flashes of glow in there, but once again, it's there could be glow without lava as well, so just that itself is not convincing. This was a cool sequence here. You see the fog comes in and it actually blows out. So you see the landscape appear. The depth of it come in just a little bit at a time. Now you see it, now you don't. Interesting. All right, and there's a helicopter. That's where there's a geologist as they were flying by and listening to that spatter come out. It was likely right around this time here. So that's the time lapses we'll share today. Let's switch to Kilauea here and look at Kilauea's notices. So back on Saturday, there was still a little trickle of lava coming out on that hardened lava lake surface. So at that point, the summary was unchanged for many, many days. They just say the eruption continued over the past 24 hours, all confined to the crater, no significant changes, and everything the same. And then come Sunday, yesterday the 11th, finally they say, summit eruption of Hawaiʻi Volcano within Maunaloa crater has paused. All recent eruptive activity in the crater has ceased. No other significant changes have been observed at the summit or in either rift zone. So that part's important. No changes in either rift zone or really in a summit. Is doing what it's been seen to do recently. No big changes there. So here's the details. Lava is no longer erupting from western vent into the lava lake on the floor of Maunaloa crater. Over the last 24 hours, lava lake has remained completely crusted over and no incandescence was visible. Time-lapse camera images show that the floor of Maunaloa crater over the past week show weak deflation and no inflation. That's an interesting note there. Measured last on the 28th, they show a cumulative rise, and we can skip over that since that's from before all these changes. Tilt records have been stable within long-term trends over the past week. We'll look in more detail than that. Volcanic tremor is weak to non-existent, so also no tremor, no magma coming up to the surface anymore. SO2 emission rate of approximately 316 tons per day was measured 3 weeks ago now, November 23rd. More recent attempts to measure SO2 have been unsuccessful because rates remain very low. So they have tried, but it's that low. Rift zone, no unusual activity along the East Rift or Southwest Rift zone. Low rates of ground formation and seismicity continue in both. So everything's below detection limits. There's nothing happening on either rift zone there. So that's the USGS update from yesterday. We have one from today as well. And once again, it has paused. No significant changes. Lava no longer erupting. Everything else is repeated here. So there's really no changes to report from yesterday to today's update. So what does it actually look like? I blew up here the F1 camera for you guys. Here is like the last 12 days since the beginning of the month. Beginning of December, lava is still circulating within that open lava lake. But the lava level starts dropping. And after it drops, it starts to solidify. When it's all one color, and then you see it retreats to this closer bottom end here. And then finally, on the 11th, all the way done, all pow. And I show it one more time. There it is. You can also see there's that west vent pond. There is that southeast pit. All these areas are glowing. The lava is coming into them, coming through them. But you see as everything recedes and hardens, then you see the glow from those places also diminish quite a bit too. There it is, okay, fully hardened. And in case, you know, what I did here is I cut off the colors. So let me show you guys. This is a full image here, and all these have these scale bars on the right side. This is showing you the temperature range for how hot white and yellow and orange and red actually stands for. But as it adjusts to the cooling lava and no lava on the surface, it's going to flash some of those pink colors and all that. So that's what that actually was. And what I've done with this one here is I've pulled us back for the whole last 3 months, and I've sped it up extremely fast. So before I play it here, it's like 1 month per second here. I'll start playing it for you guys there. So it's really to show the whole sequence, right? So 3 months ago was when we had that intrusion beneath Kilauea summit, and the whole crater floor dropped. That's this pop. You can see the floor drop, and you see this flash of color around the outside. As that crust dropped down, it actually hit that magma body, that's that lava lake inside underneath this crust here, and was able to squeeze it out the cracks on the side there. So that marks that beginning of this new phase for Kilauea. The reason I wanted to put it this fast is you actually can see the crater floor rises afterwards, right? It actually pushes upwards, and so if you just focus on this side of the crater, what you see is that crack, flash, and the crater floor rises. Crack, flash, crater floor rises. That's one pattern you see here, that first half of the pattern that you see. Now the other half you see is looking at the lake itself. And maybe if I zoom it in more, it's more obvious how the lake actually drains out before it hardens. Let's see the higher level, the distance right there of that amount of pink between the orange and the dark purple. And that area is expanding as the lake recedes down. And so that's that last, it's almost a month actually of since it began to recede. And they're saying within the last week, no longer is a whole crater floor rising as well. So I suspect it might go back a little further than that, seeing as we see the lava draining out a full almost a month ago now. Right, this was 2 weeks before Maunaloa eruption began. But I wanted to really try to highlight this process that they mentioned in the video. So coming up and then stops coming up, maybe going down slightly, but not measurable, not visible in this sequence here. What you can see is the lake draining out and hardening. So one last one on Kilauea. Here's a V1 camera for the last 24 hours, the automatic time lapse from USGS. And once again, the tiny spot of glow comes up right from in here. And one little spot on the surface of the lake seems to crack open and put out a little bit of glow, but no flow itself on the surface. And everything else is still hardened. And this right end, which is the west end, where the lava has been coming out, there's nothing there for sure. Interesting, the lava glow was coming from under the crack on this far end over here. So that was last 24 hours. Here's a view earlier today. Let me give it a reload. And we'll see anything different. It looks like we can see some fog or fume in here. And no incandescence, no red anywhere down there. So that's a visual in Kilauea. We can look through, we can look through just all the summit cameras. There's what that wide angle view looks like. Still putting out a bunch of fume. And as we said, the signals that we'll look at next, and there's as the last thing here today, are showing magma still coming in. So this may be a temporary pause. And there's that F1 camera right now. And there's that V1 camera. Some of these are also frozen. So the S1 is frozen back in November. And the B1 camera is looking good, but a lot of steam. Nothing else really visible there. So last thing is Kilauea's data. Let's look at Kilauea's data here. Here's the 1 week summit lava depth. So there was that when it started to harden was back here on the 6th. And the little bit of lava puddling up on that western end was this little bump over here. And otherwise it's basically flatlined. The tilt over the last week is much different than we were looking at a few days ago. And like looking just the last week, it's very clear now. This is a clearly rising trend, right? Over the last week. Still have a deflation-inflation cycles, but everything's offset. And in fact, I think I'm going to draw on this very similar looking pattern last week on the screen, and there it is. That's how it looks today for the last week. For the last month, there's a lava depth plot, and here's a tilt. So you can see that the tilt, there is that increasing last week right here. And maybe before that, you might have had some other variations too, right? So it's, maybe if I were to try to estimate some average trend here, maybe I'd put it something like that. And now it's rising. And so that's kind of the average. If we try to filter out the deflation-inflation events, that's what I'd come up with, very, very roughly, obviously. But giving you some idea of that volcanic trend of magma coming into the shallow regions. Remember, the tilt is the ground tilt is sensitive to those very upper levels within the upper 2 miles of ground, whereas GPS will catch deeper than that. So when we see the signal changing from not doing anything, increasing beforehand and increasing more, that would be consistent with the signal coming shallower as well. So that's what that looks like in a tilt. The SO2 it's been troubling to measure, as we just noted from the report. So looking at the GPS, here's a 1 year GPS north to south across Kilauea, and it is still a positive trend, meaning the sides are still getting further and further apart. So magma is still coming in at depth. The depth, it's still filling and spreading apart and rising, and now the tilt is rising as well, and that's how we know that the magma is still coming to the volcano here. And that's why it seems most likely that at some point it's going to express itself at the summit once again, especially not seeing any other signals elsewhere in the volcano, such as the rifts. And just to drive that point home, here's the Middle East Rift Zone at Pu'u'o, and north to south across that rift, the line is going the opposite direction, meaning the sides are getting closer together, the distance is getting shorter, that's why it's going down. The distance between them going down, getting shorter, coming closer together. And that's where that statement from USGS that nothing is happening in the rift zone any different there. So that is Kilauea and Maunaloa here as we come the last few weeks of 2022. Interesting development, Stain. As we've said before on Kilauea, the whole definition of eruption being over revolves around that arbitrary definition of it being stopped for 3 months. So Kilauea can't be said to be over. The reason they're saying it's paused is because we have essentially a 3-month window for the eruption to come back, to essentially resume itself, right? And that's not just true for Kilauea, but also Maunaloa. And if you were to apply that same methodology, right? It looks like this phase of Mauna Loa's eruption is over, but you really want to wait for a while to make sure that nothing else is happening, that new surge of magma isn't going to cause another breakage, migrate elsewhere, or anything that we haven't seen in the past. So that's what that 3-month window is designed to do, is to give nature time to finish her process before we try to start labeling her and defining her. But we can't help it, so we'll call the first phase over and we'll wait to see what comes next. What do you think about that whole eruptive definition, Dane?
Yeah, so a lot really hinges on that definition, and it's more than just some academic thing, right? So first thing about it is that any amount of lava can restart the clock on it too, right? So we know how it was applied in 2018, and the way it was applied then is we had the eruption basically ended in August, right? Early August, lava was gone. all that. But we entered a pause. And then about a month later in September, early September, a little bit of lava poked its head out of the Fissure 8, right? Just a little bit. It didn't get outside of the cone, right? But it did fill in the cone's base and things like that. And that restarted that clock. It was very little lava comparatively to all that we just went through. It was kind of like the last hurrah, a little gas cycling through and pushing a little bit of material out. But that restarts the clock on this thing. And then other things start riding upon that, right? So the things along, we have a question in chat, like, when will the National Park Service reopen trails on Maunaloa Summit? It's like, well, first, that determination that the eruption's over has to come through, right? And that's going to be minimum 3 months if we were to start that clock today. And everything along those lines in terms of recovery might also be impacted, right? And the recovery from this thing is incredibly small compared to 2018, but there's still going to need to be efforts to repair the Maunaloa access road to get back to the Maunaloa Observatory. And that's going to take, time, and they're not going to be starting road work while the eruption has not been deemed over, type of things. So it's, a lot of things depend on that determination and that somewhat arbitrary 3-month period that's been determined. And that's not just, Hawaiian volcanoes. That's an international standard that's been adopted. I can't remember who came up with it, Stanford or Smithsonian, somebody. But it's an international standard that has been adopted and applied here. And it creates some difficulties and some hurdles and things like that. But at least it's, a standard that we can all, circle around.
Yeah, some good points there. Yeah, I think I'm going to say it was the Smithsonian Institute's Global Volcanism
Smithsonian.
Program, more than likely. Yeah, and yeah, so I mean, yeah, and sometimes we saw that the definition is a good working number, but sometimes it doesn't quite fit either, right? Because we saw Kilauea summit eruption that began December 2020, went until May 2021, chose to stop for 4 months before it came back in September, and so we now call those 2 eruptions, even though really, if 4 months could be just as good as 3 months, except you don't want to have to wait to do all your recovery stuff, obviously. So it's not as good that way, but geologically it's practically the same, and you could say, oh, really, those are the same eruption, 2 different phases. But
Right.
so yeah, interesting how that all works, and it really, as far as societal impacts, an important distinction there. Yeah, good point, Stain.
This would have really came into play much more if it got the saddle, right? Because then everybody's going to be in a rush to get the road repaired, but there's going to be all these hurdles that are in place with precedent that need to be overcome first. And I'm just like, I don't see how it happens fast, if it were to happen. So good thing it didn't. Good thing Saddle Road is off the table, and we are, monitoring what seems like a ending phases of the eruption.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm trying to hedge my bets here and say the eruptive phase is over, and that might be the last phase that we have. It might be the only phase we have, but there could be another one. But this chapter is over. That's what we can say. Maybe the book, maybe it's a 1-chapter book, but maybe it's got another chapter. We have to wait and see.
Right. But yeah, just the last chapter in Kilauea was in 2018 was just like a tribute to somebody, and that reset the clock.
Yeah.
So it all plays together.
Yeah. Kilauea is like a never-ending story, really. Always more to be written there. Maybe Manolo is coming into that phase once again too. Let's see. So let's do some questions, some thank yous, and
Right.
we can talk about our schedule too a little bit. It seems like because things are wound down for the most part, and it is end of the year, and there's a lot of things to kind of catch up and wrap up on here. Where unless something changes, we'll likely go to 2 a week. Right, Dane? And we'll do Mondays and
for a
Thursdays.
little while at least. Yeah.
So
Seems like unless something happens with Kilauea or something, when Maunaloa does something interesting, we might be in for a little bit of a period with no lava. And we haven't had that for what, almost a year and a half now, 1 year and 3 months, something like that.
yeah, so it might be a good time for a little break, just a little slow down, and I might sneak off for vacation next week. So,
Right.
So yeah.
All right. Well,
Mondays and Thursdays.
First, want to thank everybody for tuning in. We rely on viewers like you to help get this content out there. You know, we have to jockey with position with all these hype and clickbaity streams and YouTubers and everything in between. The news media isn't any better. So we gotta, you know, we live in that ecosystem, and your likes, your shares, subscribes all helps the algorithm to try and get, you know, people the real information as opposed to just clickbaity hype. So like, share, subscribe. I know everybody likes, you know, doesn't like hearing it anymore because it's on every video, but it really does help. We do have a couple questions here.
Think of that as those easy Christmas present for us. Yeah, just click the like on a video a couple extra times here.
Right.
Share it once a year or something. That's good enough.
We have a couple questions here. So Brian is wondering about, and I know you addressed it, but let's just, you know, put it out there again. Brian asks, can the flows slow down like this, and then all of a sudden they erupt worse than the first eruption?
On this volcano in this area, that has not happened in recorded history. That's the simplest we can put it. Is it possible that something that we haven't seen in recorded history occurs in nature? Yeah, absolutely, that's possible, but, you know, you'd put it at a very, very, very small chance of that actually happening. Especially considering that everything the volcano has done recently is exposed at the surface, right? And so we care about not necessarily has it ever done it, but has it done it any time recently that it might do it again now? And that answer seems to be no. Yeah, it's one of the most definitive statements the USGS has made, right? Lava will not erupt at higher rates, and it will not erupt in other rift zones, and it will not erupt higher on this rift zone either. Pretty small. Right. Set of possibilities left there.
Narrows down the window of options.
Yeah, a lot.
All right. Yeah. Arthur asks, my question is on the record, what has been the shortest interval between Maunaloa eruptions?
So we read the one about the Northeast Rift. So on a Northeast Rift, the shortest interval was 3 years between eruptions. But I mean, we have 2022. Before that, in the Northeast Rift was 1984. Before that, we had 1942. Those are the three most recent Northeast Rift eruptions. You can say the shortest one was 3 years between them, but the last three eruptions in the Northeast Rift have been a long time apart. Right, so I still would go back to likely the next one is a summit eruption because that's the pattern that's most likely. If you're always going to bet, you know, that's the one that's got the highest odds, twice the odds of either rift zone.
That's where Vegas would go.
Yeah. So that's likely would be the next one, and so maybe Northeast Rift isn't necessarily the best measure there. So
right.
I have to go back and look at Northeast Rift to summit intervals and get back to you, Arthur and Nat. Sorry about that.
All right, we have a question from Glenn who asks, should I unpack my go bag? Well, I mean, it's kind of good just to have a go bag in general, you know, and not really specific for Maunaloa. I mean, you know, for Maunaloa, you might throw a gas mask in there with the 3M 6000 series SO2 filters or something, but that's about it, you know, in terms of like the standard go bag.
Yeah, so yeah, the idea of a go bag is, you know, what Dane just said, like it's supposed to be good for other issues, whether there's a storm or whether there's an earthquake. You know, I keep saying to everyone in Kīlauea, like, earthquake is way more likely as a everyday threat than the actual volcano. I mean, the volcano is the one you obviously worry about being different, right? Because people live with earthquakes for a long time there. Earthquakes are much more likely to do damage than lava in most parts of the entire island, really.
Right. All right. Well, do you want to discuss the last little thing? Kind of throw it in there. Seeing questions about the film permit, the film office in the state.
I know nothing about this.
Putting out there.
Go for it.
I do. Yeah. So today on KHON, a article was written that the state film commission, I believe it is, was stating that basically you were required to obtain a film permit in order to film the Maunaloa eruption, right? And they said that in that article that there's no option to retroactively go back and obtain a film permit. If you filmed and didn't sell stuff, you keep your copyright, but you still can't sell it or you'll be fined, they were saying. And all this, it basically comes out after the eruption ends, right? So, yeah, it's really interesting. We've heard of this before. It's an old law of some kind, but enforcing that, good luck. Just good luck. There's so much video out there, especially over the period that law has existed. We're not just talking about this eruption, but we're talking about 2018. We're talking about all footage that basically wasn't filmed on public or on private land is incorporated too. So the national park, technically, I think you're supposed to, the way that they're saying it is you're supposed to, even though the national park said you no longer need a permit to film there, you still need to obtain one from the state, these guys are saying, or something. So yeah, that's going to be interesting. My question is, one, I have two questions for the state, the guys putting this out there. One, how many people actually obtained a permit to film Mauna Loa during this eruption? They said in the article that it takes at least a week to obtain it. This eruption went less than 2 weeks. So I'd like to know how many people, exactly obtained a permit. And also I'd like to know if KHON, that was also broadcasting the eruption and wrote this article, if they obtained a permit for the footage that they used in their broadcasts, right? This is a deep hole that just got opened, and I don't understand the timing or the reasoning for trying to open it now, but it's out there and it's happening. So I figured I'd talk about it. And it's going to be interesting. Yeah, I don't know how you enforce that. I mean, what are you going to do? Start going on YouTube and, making content, filing, support tickets, right? And filing copyright claims on how does this work? So that came out today. It'll be interesting to see how that proceeds. And if anybody hears of anybody or knows people that are being cited by the state for filming Mauna Loa, please let us know. That's something we would be interested in knowing. And yeah, I mean, I've seen people say like, oh, they just want to make money. No, they don't. If you want to make money, you would retroactively say, hey, you guys are in big trouble unless you pay us $20, right? You pay us the $20, we're going to, let everything fly. But they're not doing that. They're just saying, no, it was all bad. All of it was bad. Basically, unless you got our special permit, which I don't know if anybody got, right? So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I've heard a bunch of people surprised by it. And yes, everybody knew that this thing existed, but it was never enforced really. So what is the state going to try and enforce it now? That's really the question. So if anybody hears of anything on those lines, let us know, and we will proceed as needed. But yeah, this is the state, not the county. Just to make that clear, we were filming, talking with the county and all kinds of stuff. And we didn't really do much with the state at all in this eruption. We mostly were working with the federal agencies, like USGS, Puakaloa Training Area, and the county, right? So state comes in with this hurrah at the very end to, I don't know, stake their claim and flex. I don't know what this is about.
Yeah, we did. I did reach out to the state in a couple ways there, but it was a transition time at the state level, as we've heard from mayor too, right? The governor just coming in and appointing all new department heads, and all that's happening in the middle of this eruption. So just as well, I think that county and feds were able to take the lead on it. Yeah, interesting. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the whole film industry has just been totally turning its head in the last 20 years, right? I mean, that's why the national park had a system of everyone having to get film permits. I know a little bit more about that, so I can talk about that a little bit, right? It's a way of managing. It's a way of managing the flow of people, the damage, because I've done a lot of documentaries, and God, like the cameramen are the worst. Like their job is to like focus on a little viewfinder. They'll trample anything and everything. Anyway, it could be a baby, they'll step on it, right? Taking a little farther, but they really don't care what they're stepping on. Like the shot is above everything else, and like that's often how it goes. So that's why experience doing that. Get enough crews, you see enough stuff being trampled. You have a ranger always have to be on site. Tell them, okay, like here's where you're gonna be, and like nope, don't trample that. Nope. Someone who doesn't mind interrupting and breaking the shot and making the work start over because they're not doing it the right way as far as the park's requirements. So that's the general idea as far as I understand it, right? As far as being able to manage how many people are out in an environment, potentially doing damage at a time. So then the park has limited rangers and resources to go out and ferry them around. That's how it used to be. And then people can
that
take
worked
videos
back
with
in
their
the day.
phones now, and you don't need a giant camera, and you don't need to have a giant film crew of 10 people. You can actually have 1-2 people can make an entire movie by themselves. And so then we have the legal challenges coming in, and the parks changes their policy, and really like you can't manage everyone with a cell phone. This system was set up for people who had film production
Big cameras.
crews, not for individuals with cell phones or with a DSLR or what have you. That's not how it was set up. So we see the park was forced to do that through legal challenges, and it seems like, to me, what I'm hearing is it's likely to be a legal challenge coming to the state, and they're going to be forced to update this system too. Just about every system we've seen in the state has been antiquated, right? Going back to how we were tracking COVID and the website crashing all the freaking time. I mean, everything is behind. And
it gets it gets even weirder because what's the definition of cell nowadays? Back in the day when you're talking about distribution used to be a pretty cut and dried thing as well. Right? You couldn't launch your own, channel and do it all in-house and have production and the broadcasting all on site. But now that's standard practice, right? Back in the day, just the policing of that was very easy. Now it's impossible. Good luck. There's no way you would be able to do anything. And the definition of sold has expanded too. Right? Because back then you would sell it to some distributor that then would resell it, and that was pretty cut and dried. Or you would sell it yourself and cut out the middleman. Now it's more ad revenue based packages, right? And even then it gets even grayer because like a news channel will be like, no. We got this footage from a viewer that gave it to us, and we're there, and that allows us to bypass it and then sell ad revenue. It's like, all right, so where does this line get drawn, right? If we're gonna do this dance, where does that sold line? And it gets blown out of the. I mean, it's a deep can of worms, this whole thing. So just figured I'd point it out. I mean, we can tell we're kind of animated about it just because it's like, wow, this is insane to think somebody's really gonna try that.
It's a little bit of a trigger because in 2018, people were not allowed to see the lava. You're not allowed to take a picture of the lava. People had their cameras confiscated from taking pictures of the lava. Like, it's like, okay, like everyone came and I saw this beautiful thing that didn't really, really have a threat to anyone. And this wonder of the world and a beautiful thing. And then you got to have someone come in raining in the parade here and be like, oh, by the way, anyways, it feels a little bit like that. That's kind of where I would feel a little triggered by that. So that's why I'll talk about it a little bit here. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't see how they can enforce it. And I see it likely to be legally challenged, right? I mean, it is.
I know, it's so weird. It's so weird. I mean, imagine being tasked with that job. Try and police that. It just, your job's secure as long as people have interest to try and police it, because you're never going to finish.
I mean, if the point was to manage hordes of photographers, then it's too late. You failed your management mission. If that was your goal, you're trying to you failed. So what are you trying to do now? Like manage it retroactively to I don't know what that's for.
Yeah, it seems more like a legal bluff of some kind to me, where they're trying to cover their own, like they didn't actually, discourage anything, and they're somewhat obligated to, or something by law. Would be my guess, but hey, I'm just, opining.
I'm sure that the many photographers will go on their resources, and maybe the National Press Photographers Association. I mean, somebody can help out, and right. I imagine other states have likely, at least one other state's likely figured this out already, and probably behind as usual.
Oh, that would be totally unsurprising.
Yeah.
All right, well, let me check chat one last time. I appreciate everybody that tuned in, and I think that basically got as many questions as I could. I tried to get us other questions in chat. So yeah, appreciate everybody that tuned out. Like, subscribe, share, all that fun jazz. And unless something happens, we will be back Thursday.
Was able to look up a little bit more for Arthur's question in between intervals of eruptions, right? So usually the shortest intervals are between a summit eruption and a flank eruption, and then it can be less than a year. If you're looking for like a northeast rift eruption to a summit eruption, The you go 49 to 40, 42 to 49 is 7 years, or 4 years after 36. That's really that's shortest. 4 years after 1899. 6 years after 1881. So that's all of them, I think, there. I know there's one more. That's 3 years from 56, 59. That was the one I mentioned earlier. So there you go. 3 years is the best answer to give. Still.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that does it for me.
Thanks, Dane. And yeah, thank you guys. And once again, we'll be back on Thursday, 5 p.m. Hawaiian time. Until then, from Hawaii Tracker, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everybody.